Star Wars has always had characters with disabilities. In a galaxy full of danger, it's not hard to see why. But the movies and shows don't exist in a vacuum, and our perceptions of disability have evolved since A New Hope was first released. Disability in Star Wars has evolved as the American disability rights movement fought to change how disability is perceived and treated in our world. And with the massive success of the franchise, Star Wars has also influenced how our society thinks about disability. This video essay looks to contribute to the scholarly and popular discussion concerned with disability in science fiction, examining how both the disability rights movement and Star Wars have influenced perceptions of disability in our society in tangent with one another. This is part one of a two-part series examining the relationship between disability in our world and disability in Star Wars. The first part will cover the disability rights movement from the late 1960s through the 2000s, and the Star Wars content that was released during this time. Part 2 will cover the movement and Star Wars from the 2010s to today. Ed Roberts, a quadriplegic wheelchair user, is credited with having started the American disability rights movement in the late 1960s when he pushed the University of California, Berkeley to accommodate his disability. Roberts worked to organize the disabled community at his campus, and through the 1970s continued his work uniting people with disabilities to help them find community and self-determination with each other. The movement continued to grow through the 1970s and 80s. National and local groups of people with disabilities organized across the country. People with all different types of disabilities came together because they had shared experiences of exclusion and discrimination from things like public transportation and access to employment. They saw themselves as a minority group in this country and defined their problem as a rights issue, as other minorities had. Groups began to protest, conduct sit-ins, and lobby for legislation to try to get civil, human, and legal rights for people with disabilities. At the same time the disability rights movement was building itself and beginning to become a movement, George Lucas was building Star Wars.
Hey, we don't serve their kind here.
What?
Your droids. They'll have to wait outside. We don't want them here.
Let's wait out by the speeder. We don't want any trouble.
I heartily agree with you, sir.
To understand disability in Star Wars, we have to start with droids. Droids are programmed to be free labor. While some droids are allowed to move beyond this status, their mechanical nature separates them from human status and makes them less than, ranking lower on the social hierarchy, both in-world and from the viewer's perspective. So when living characters find themselves looking more droid-like, their status is lowered in-world. And as viewers, we're supposed to understand that these cyborgs are now less than human. Darth Vader is perhaps the most iconic cyborg in all of cinema. Having faced a near-death experience in Episode 3 that left him badly burned and in need of 4 new limbs and additional assistance for basic functions like breathing, Vader finds himself very close to droid status and used for his labor by the Emperor. He also represents one of the unfortunate standard portrayals of disability in media. Throughout the original trilogy, disability is equated with evil, and Vader is the epitome of this portrayal.
He's more machine now than man, twisted and evil.
From this line, we're supposed to understand that at least some of that evil stems from the parts of him that are machine in nature. It also seems that we are supposed to feel some pity for this character that has had pieces of his humanity physically ripped away. Portrayal of disabled characters in this way influences how we see real people with disabilities. For many, their only exposure to people with disabilities is through their screens, so it matters how disabled characters are presented. Representations like this encourage viewers to see the need for something like a prosthetic limb as unhuman. And in the human-centric societies of both Star Wars and our own world, something that isn't human is seen as lower down on the social hierarchy. Disability becomes something bad, something that we wouldn't want for ourselves, something worth pitying. Even for Luke, the loss of his hand and subsequent mechanical replacement are seen as a consequence for his actions, which can lead to the idea that disability is somehow a punishment bestowed on those who do wrong, which is just not true. Equating disability with bad or evil has long been the standard in society, but the disability rights movement of the 1970s and 80s tried to provide us with an alternative perspective, The social model of disability tells us that disability is not a consequence of an individual's actions or a failure of their body, but rather the result of an inaccessible world made by and for the able-bodied. Disability is not the individual problem of a sad few, but a systemic problem that has found its way into every aspect of society, from rampless buildings to captionless videos to our infuriating healthcare system and beyond. Unfortunately, this message hadn't reached the general public when these movies were being created and released, so the older idea that disability is bad was presented in these original 3 films. In 1990, all of the work done by people with disabilities during the previous 2 decades culminated in the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. This piece of legislation gave people with disabilities the right to and protection in employment, public accommodations, telecommunications, and transportation. The ADA is why today buildings are required to have ramps and push buttons to open doors. Buses have to have wheelchair lifts, and employers aren't supposed to decide not to hire someone just because they use a wheelchair. But after the ADA passed into law, people with disabilities struggled to get these accommodations they were promised. This was because the general public still didn't understand much about the disability rights movement. They didn't understand why people with disabilities had created a social movement or why the ADA was necessary. News journalists have always helped perpetuate a lot of the negative stereotypes surrounding people with disabilities, and they played an important role in maintaining this idea that disability is bad and unwanted. So the people fighting for the disability rights movement thought they would have to spend a lot of time and resources trying to educate journalists on why their stereotypes were wrong. They would rather spend that time on getting the ADA passed. So this movement didn't really engage with the media much, which meant the general American public never got the message that people with disabilities were facing discrimination, and that the ADA was going to help fight some of this. So when George Lucas went to create his next 3 Star Wars movies in the late 90s and early 2000s, this idea that disability isn't actually a bad thing just hadn't become widely known or understood. In the prequel trilogy, we are shown that, like Luke, Anakin loses a hand as a consequence for a bad decision. We are also introduced to General Grievous. Like Darth Vader, Grievous has also become subservient to the Emperor. As a face of the bad guys, his cyborg design is intended to be scary and inhuman. In the Clone Wars TV show, we are reintroduced to Darth Maul through his brother Savage Opress. Both of these characters have been forced to work for the dark side, and both became disabled as a consequence. However, the Clone Wars marks a notable shift in the portrayal of disability. We are introduced to many characters with disabilities that are considered to be good guys. There are multiple well-respected Jedi Masters with impairments, even Yoda himself.
Surrender? You should.
And of course, we become better acquainted with the clones. The clones are incredibly important to a discussion of disability in Star Wars. Cloned from the most ideal human body in the galaxy, the Republic's army isn't supposed to include clones with disabilities. But in our world, one of the largest groups of people with disabilities are veterans. And like veterans, some clones inevitably end up becoming disabled. Commander Wolffe is one of those clones that became disabled during the war. Having lost an eye, he became just a little less human, percentage-wise at least. Except in Star Wars, a cybernetic replacement can easily make up for what has been lost. It can even be an enhancement. This brings up an interesting question. Is a character disabled if their aid allows them to function normally? Well, I would say yes. In the real world, people are still disabled even when they have functioning replacements. Part of this is because social perception is a key aspect of disability. In the real world, Commander Wolffe would be ostracized and discriminated against for his disability. And of course, in-world, the Kaminoans would view him as less than perfect. Had Wolffe lost something that couldn't be so easily replaced, we can expect the Kaminoans would not have allowed him to continue serving in the army. If he had been allowed to continue living, he may have been relegated to janitor duty, as another fan favorite clone was. 99 is an amazing step in the right direction for disability portrayal in Star Wars. Having come out of the tube less than perfect meant he was barely treated as human by the Kaminoans, and he became a source of free labor for them. But through the perspective of Domino Squad, the audience is shown 99's humanity. We learn that he is a regular person with his own ideas and emotions. By the end of his arc, we understand that while he may not contribute to the army as other clones do, he's still completely capable of contributing in his own valuable way. We see the discrimination he faces because of his disabilities, and we come to recognize that it is the fault of the Kaminoans, not 99, that he was prevented from achieving his aspirations. In 99, the social model of disability begins to find its way into Star Wars. And the spirit of 99's character lives on in The Bad Batch, which I will discuss at length in Part 2. So the question becomes, why did the portrayal of disability shift during the Clone Wars? For starters, the disability rights movement has been around for 30 years when the Clone Wars first aired on TV. So through the interpersonal networks of people with disabilities, their messages had time to spread beyond just those involved in the movement. I also argue that the growing use of the internet in the 2000s, particularly social media, helped people with disabilities to share their perspectives with fewer barriers. The creation and widespread use of platforms like Facebook and YouTube exposed people without disabilities to people with disabilities, who were sharing their experiences and perspectives. This allowed ideas about discrimination against people with disabilities and about the social model of disability to reach a much wider audience. That concludes part 1 of this video series. In part 2, I will continue discussing the impacts of the internet on the disability rights movement during the 2010s and 2020s, as well as the neurodiversity movement. In the next video, I will also cover Star Wars content released during this time period, from Rebels to Rogue One and the sequel trilogy, to the most recent shows that have aired, including The Mandalorian, The Bad Batch, and the Book of Boba Fett. If you'd like to read more about the things I've discussed in part 1, these are the sources I used. May the Force be with you.